All right. Welcome to another deep dive. We're going to be tackling today the current political landscape
Yeah.
and how it's playing out across different communities,
Right.
especially focusing on Hispanic and Black communities.
Okay.
You sent over a really interesting mix of news snippets and opinion pieces,
Uh-huh.
and it seems like you're really curious about the different approaches being taken and how they are playing out in people's lives. So let's unpack this together.
I think that's important. It's
Yeah.
important to look at it with a critical eye. And not just the policies, but also, like you said, the historical context and systemic factors that shape these issues.
Yeah, totally.
Mm.
Okay, so let's just jump right in. One of the things that caught my eye right away was this bipartisan effort around the Child Care Investment Act.
Yeah.
And it seems like it's getting a lot of attention. It's basically about making childcare more affordable,
Right.
especially for Latino families
Okay.
who face a very heavy burden when it comes to childcare costs.
And it is a burden.
Yeah.
Studies show over 60% of Latino families struggle with the high cost of childcare.
Wow.
And very often it forces one parent, usually the mother, to leave the workforce.
Right.
This act aims to change that.
Yeah.
It updates tax credits, encourages employer-sponsored childcare options,
Okay.
and even helps families set up savings plans specifically for childcare expenses.
So it seems like they're really trying to address those modern childcare costs head on.
Mm,
Like, it's not just about making it a little cheaper. It's about making it possible for families to actually afford quality care
yeah,
without having to make these huge sacrifices.
exactly. And by doing that, it could have a ripple effect on the economic well-being of those families.
Right.
More parents, particularly mothers, will be able to stay in the workforce,
Uh-huh.
boosting their earning potential and contributing to the overall economy.
That makes total sense. It's not just about childcare in isolation.
Yeah.
It's about the bigger picture of economic empowerment. And speaking of empowerment, there's also this White House initiative on advancing educational equity through Hispanic serving institutions,
Okay.
or HSIs for short.
Now, HSIs are colleges and universities where at least 25% of the student body is Hispanic.
Okay.
This initiative focuses on strengthening those institutions,
Yeah.
providing them with more resources and support so they can better serve their students.
So it's about leveling the playing field in a sense, making sure that Latino students have access to the same quality of education
Right.
and opportunities as their peers.
Precisely. And again, this ties back to the economic well-being of the Hispanic community.
Uh-huh.
By investing in education, we're investing in the future workforce, fostering innovation,
Right.
creating pathways for upward mobility.
Okay, so we're seeing this clear focus on supporting Hispanic families,
Yeah.
addressing their needs in a very practical way, from childcare to education.
Mm-hmm.
But when we turn to the conversation around support for Black communities,
Okay.
the tone shifts pretty dramatically.
Right.
And you flagged this in your notes too. It really jumps out
It does.
from the source material.
Yes, there's a palpable sense of frustration and disillusionment
Yeah.
in the sources that you provided.
Hmm.
A key point of contention seems to be the idea of targeted support for Black communities.
Okay.
One source even states, and I'm quoting here,
Okay.
when it comes to Black people, the response is, we can't do anything just for Black people that would be unconstitutional or discrimination.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's pretty stark.
it is.
And it seems to contrast sharply with the initiatives we just discussed
Yeah.
for Hispanic families.
And that's exactly the point the source is trying to make,
Yeah.
highlighting what they perceive as a double standard,
Right.
referencing things like Japanese reparations
Uh-huh.
for internment during World War II,
Okay.
the recent Asian hate bill,
Right.
and even broader support for immigrant communities.
Yeah.
The argument is that similar targeted support and acknowledgement of historical injustices
Mm.
isn't being extended to Black Americans.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like they're saying we can address the specific needs and challenges
Right.
faced by other communities,
Mm-hmm.
but when it comes to the Black community, the conversation hits a roadblock.
Yeah, and that roadblock often seems to be built on the argument that any form of targeted support
Right.
for Black Americans constitutes reverse discrimination or violates the principle of equality.
Right.
But the sources that you sent push back on this notion pretty hard,
Yeah.
arguing that true equality actually requires acknowledging and
Mhm.
addressing those historical and systemic disadvantages
Right.
faced by Black Americans.
And it's not just a theoretical debate, right?
No.
They list some very specific areas where they see this disparity playing out in real life, concerns about police brutality and racial profiling,
Yeah.
discrimination in employment, and even barriers to accessing business loans and home loans.
Exactly. These aren't just abstract concepts.
Right.
These represent tangible obstacles
Yeah.
that many Black Americans face daily.
Mm-hmm.
And the source material argues that these issues stem from a long history of systemic racism
Yeah.
that continues to permeate various aspects of American society.
So it's not enough to simply say everyone has equal opportunities now.
Right.
We have to acknowledge that the starting line isn't the same for everyone
Exactly.
because of these historical and systemic factors.
And that's where the conversation about reparations comes in.
Yeah.
Now, as we touched on earlier, the idea of reparations is complex and multifaceted.
Right.
There are different models proposed,
Mm-hmm.
ranging from direct financial payments to investments in education, healthcare, and community development.
And those different models really spark a lot of debate
Yeah.
about what would be most effective,
Right.
what's feasible,
Mm-hmm.
and even what constitutes fair reparations.
Yeah, it's a challenging conversation for sure.
Yeah.
It requires careful consideration of the historical context,
Yeah.
the ongoing impact of slavery and segregation, and the various forms of discrimination that persist today.
And speaking of challenging conversations, there's another layer to this that I found particularly interesting.
Okay.
The frustration and sense of being overlooked seem to extend to the political realm as well,
Yeah.
specifically with regards to Vice President Kamala Harris.
Yes. One of the sources you shared,
Uh-huh.
a letter from a group of Black community leaders,
Okay.
expresses deep disillusionment with Vice President Harris.
Right.
They argue she's failed to effectively champion the needs and concerns of the Black community,
Mm-hmm.
and that her actions haven't really matched her rhetoric.
And they don't hold back in their critique.
No, they don't.
They specifically call out her record on issues like criminal justice reform,
Yeah.
voting rights, and even her handling of the border crisis. They argue that she's prioritized political expediency over genuine advocacy for the Black community.
It's a powerful indictment.
Yeah.
And it reflects a broader sentiment that's been circulating within certain segments of the Black community.
Right.
The feeling that their votes and their voices are taken for granted by the Democratic Party,
Mm-hmm.
and that their concerns aren't being given the attention or priority that they deserve.
So it's not just about specific policies.
Right.
Or even about reparations.
Mm-hmm.
It's about the feeling of not being truly represented,
Yeah.
of not having their voices heard and their needs addressed
Right.
at the highest levels of government.
Exactly. And this raises some critical questions for us to consider.
Mm-hmm.
What does effective political representation truly look like?
Right.
How can individuals and communities hold their elected officials accountable?
Yeah.
And how can we move beyond symbolic gestures to create meaningful change that actually addresses those systemic issues at the root of these concerns?
Those are some really big questions.
They are.
And I think it's important to acknowledge there isn't a single easy answer.
Right.
But engaging with these questions, grappling with the complexities and having these difficult conversations is crucial
Mm-hmm.
if we want to move towards a more just and equitable society.
Yeah, it feels like we're really at this crossroads
Mm-hmm.
where there are these different paths being taken.
Yeah.
And the source material you sent really highlights the contrasting experiences
Right.
of Hispanic and Black communities
Yeah.
when it comes to political support
Yeah.
and addressing historical injustices.
I think it's important to remember this isn't about pitting one community against another. It's
Right.
about recognizing that different groups have faced unique challenges
Mm-hmm.
and may require different approaches to achieve true equity.
It's not a zero-sum game, right?
No.
It's about ensuring that everyone has the opportunity to thrive and succeed,
Yeah,
regardless of their background or the systemic barriers that they may face.
exactly.
And that brings us back to you, dear listener.
Right.
You've presented us with this fascinating collection of viewpoints and concerns,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm curious to know what resonates most with you. Yeah.
What stands out as particularly significant or thought-provoking?
What sparked your curiosity?
Was there a particular quote or a story that really made you stop and think?
Because ultimately understanding these complex issues
Mm-hmm.
is a journey, not a destination.
Right.
Requires ongoing learning, critical thinking, and a willingness to engage with different perspectives,
Mm-hmm.
even those we may not agree with.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final thought.
Okay.
If you were advising policymakers,
Right.
what specific steps would you recommend to address the concerns raised by both communities?
Mm-hmm.
How would you bridge the gap between those contrasting approaches
Right.
and create policies that are truly equitable and effective for all Americans?
It's a challenging but crucial question to ponder.